clothing that, thank you, these are the, thanks, okay, now I'm going to talk to the camera, okay? That was a bit rough. Hi crafty people! Have you ever had an item of clothes that you loved and you wished you had the pattern so you could make it again? Or have you ever had the item of clothing that you wish you had the pattern so you could tweak it a little bit to make it perfect? Today we're going to be learning how to clone our clothes so that we can take our clothes, make a pattern, and then know how to make that item of clothing again. If you're new here, then welcome. My name's Marie and this channel is to motivate mums to make and mend. I'm a mum of 3 kids. I have a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old and a 10-month-old. And today my 2 oldest children are modelling some of the clothes that I'd like to make patterns from. I'd like to replicate a jumper and pants for my son and a dress for my daughter. Today we'll be focusing on making the patterns for these clothes, and then over the next few weeks we're going to be turning those patterns into their actual sewn projects. If you're interested to see how I turn the pattern into the instructions so that I actually know how to sew these items of clothing, click subscribe so that next week you can come back and watch me turn the patterns that we make today into an actual item of clothing. So with that all said, we're ready to start our pattern making, so let's get making!
My mum likes clothes and clothes.
But clones clothes.
Clothes and clothes. My mum makes patterns.
We have here the items of clothing that I'm going to be cloning. We have this dress that Isabel's wearing, this jumper that Elijah's wearing, and also his pants. So the first thing I'm going to do is have a look how they fit on their bodies. If there's any measurements that I think that I would like to change, I'm going to write them down on my piece of paper here so that once I start the cloning process of drawing out my pattern, I can refer back to my measurements and make those adjustments on the pattern so that I don't forget them when I'm cutting out the pattern. So are we ready? Okay.
I'd like to modify Isabel's dress here to make the waistline a little bit lower so it's sitting just above her hips, and I'd also like the length of the dress to hit her knee so it needs to be just a little bit longer on her. This jumper of Elijah's is probably a size too big in every respect, but it's the style that I wanted. So I need to take it up on the sleeves and in the length of the body, and it really is quite big and baggy around under his arms, but I decided I'd leave it like that and I think it will look fine because of the fabric that I'll be using on it. Elijah has very difficult proportions to find pants that fit him. These pants are a good fit on his waist but really short on his ankles, so I'm going to be adding some length to the bottoms of the pants and also adding some pockets because where else do you keep your rocks and toy cars?
So most of that time was spent with playing with the tape measure, but we got there eventually. I've written down our measurements. Is that all?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Okay.
Bye.
You're going to need some big paper so that you can draw out your pattern. You could use butcher's paper or wrapping paper or a whole bunch of paintings that your kids have done that just don't really have a purpose.
Am I a bad mum?
We need 3 pattern pieces to make these pants. We need the front of the leg of the pants, a back of the leg of the pants, and a waistband. So I'm going to start by tracing out the front of the leg of the pants. To do this, I have the front facing down on my paper. I've added in my extra hem on these pants to make them a little bit longer, and I'm smoothing out this seam so that I can see where the front seam needs to be. I'm pinning these in place to make it easier when I'm tracing around it so that it doesn't move. Once I have it perfectly flat, I'm able to then trace around it, including adding in that extra hem. When drawing along the top, I go underneath where the waistband will be because that will be a separate piece that I'll cut out. Before moving on to my next pattern piece, I make sure to label it with what the item is and that it's the front of the pants so that I don't forget later on. The waistband for these pants is just a long thin rectangle, so I'm taking the measurements and just writing those measurements onto my pattern piece. I'm not actually drawing a separate piece to keep. To make my pattern piece for the back of these pants, I have my pants facing with the back down onto my paper, and again I am adding in my hem allowance and smoothing out the pants so that they're flat. I'm drawing along the outside seam of the legs here, and then I need to manipulate the pants over a little bit so that I'm able to draw that inside seam. I carefully roll the pant leg over so the inseam is flat against my page, and then I pin it in place so that I'm able to trace it nice and easily. Again, I make sure to label my pattern piece with what it is and what part of the pattern it is so that I don't forget later on. I do one last check to make sure that my pattern piece is accurate. If there are any parts that aren't quite accurate, I might give it a little snip, or if I'm missing a part that needs to be made a bit bigger, I can add a separate piece of paper underneath, put some sticky tape on it and trace my pattern a little bit larger to fill in any gaps. Then once my pattern pieces are all accurate, I'm able to file them away together so that I don't lose each of the pieces I need to make this pattern. The front and back piece of this skirt are both exactly the same, so I'm able to trace around it and then just cut two out when I'm going to make my actual dress. I trace carefully around each of the sides, marking where the waist is so that I'll be able to then add that in a second. I'm pinning just below the waistline of the dress so that I'm able to fold the bodice of the dress down and accurately trace out where the waistline hits for the skirt. When I was measuring Isabel, I recorded that I wanted the length of the skirt piece to be 25 centimeters from the waistline to the length of her skirt. So I'm just adjusting that measurement now by going around at various points to measure 25 centimeters and then drawing a line to connect each of those points together to make it the right length. Again, I'm recording any of the information I need to know on this skirt, like the fact that I have not added seam allowance and that I need to cut two of these. I wanted to make the waistline 5 centimeters lower on the bodice of this dress, so I've measured out 5 centimeters and I'm lining up the original bodice of the dress on that line, knowing that when I cut the pattern piece out, I'll be cutting right to the edge of the page to make my new bodice that bit bigger. Other than the neckline, the front and back piece of the bodice are completely the same. So as I'm tracing around the armholes where the sleeves are attached, I know that it's the same on the front and back. The only difference being, as I mentioned, the neckline is lower on the front piece. So I'm marking on the pattern where both the back neckline and the front neckline are. I'm running my finger along the front neckline and my pencil underneath onto the paper so that I can trace that front neckline onto this pattern piece. As I cut out this pattern piece, I am not cutting along the line. I'm leaving a bit of a gap so that I can fold the pattern piece in half. And then as I cut it out more accurately, both sides will then be exactly the same. Where my lines aren't quite matching up, I'll just kind of split the difference and cut in between the lines. But this way, I know that both sides of my bodice will be the same as each other. Then I'm comparing it to the original dress bodice to make any adjustments if necessary. On this piece, I'm remembering to mark that the front and back neckline are different and also that this needs to be cut using a stretch fabric. The front and back of these sleeves are exactly the same, which makes it nice and easy. I'm just tracing around it and then flipping the sleeve over so that I'm able to see the armhole and trace that line accurately too. When I cut this pattern piece out of fabric, I will need to cut it on the fold so that the front and back part of the sleeves are all attached. So I've written cut on fold at the top there to remind me. I've folded up the bottom of this jumper because I know on my measurements that I needed to take off a bit of length so that it fit Elijah properly. The armholes where the light blue and dark blue parts meet are exactly the same, the only difference being that the neckline is slightly different. So as I pin this and trace around it, I know that it's all the same and I'll need to record 2 different necklines when I get to the top. So it's the same as when I did the bodice of the dress. I'm recording the back neckline and then using my finger on the top to find where the front neckline is and record that as well. As with all the patterns that I've made, I've recorded the details on this one, including that the front and back necklines are different. I'm cutting around the outside of it roughly, not right on the line, so that as I fold it in half, I'm able to cut the lines more accurately. One side of the jumper was slightly longer than the other, so I had to tape some spare paper onto it so that I could lengthen that, and then I was able to cut along the lines to make both sides exactly the same as each other. As I'm sure you can tell, none of this is an exact science, it's a bit of trial and error, but as you do it more, you become more familiar with what to look out for and how to make things more accurate. The front and back of these sleeves are slightly different because of the neckline of this jumper. I'm folding my piece of paper in half and lying the sleeve along the fold, so that as I trace around, I can trace the front part of the sleeve on one side of the folded line and then the back on the other, so that when I unfold it, the sleeve will be complete. The back of the sleeve is larger than the front of the sleeve, so I'm tracing the back of the sleeve first. I'm using pins to hold the bodice of the jumper in place, flipping the sleeve over so that I can then trace along the armhole. I'm recording that this is the back of the sleeve before I unpin it, and cutting it out so that I have the sleeve opened. Then I'm placing the front side of my pattern piece face down on the front side of the jumper and modifying it so that it matches what the sleeve should look like for the front of the jumper. Here's a little sneak peek of the jumper I'll be making using this pattern. I'll be sharing the making of this jumper next week.
So there you have it. You've now learned how you can clone your clothes. I hope you've enjoyed learning this new skill, and if you have, don't forget to like the video so I know you've enjoyed it. There's a playlist down below of different sewing skills videos if you'd like to watch a few more similar videos to this. Don't forget to subscribe as well so that you can come back next week and watch as I create the jumper from the pattern that we made today. Also, I'd love for you to follow me on Instagram at mymum.marie so you can see what I'm up to, and I'd love you to tag me as well so I can see what you've been up to. I hope you come back to watch another of my videos very soon, and until then, get creative and I'll see you later.